Amen. You may be seated.
Morning once again. So for those of you who maybe walked in, during the first song or after the first song, you kind of wondered what was Derek doing up on the screen, and it's 2020, so we all jumped to the same conclusion. Why was he on the screen? The reason is he's under the weather. He had a test. It's not COVID. We were prepared as a church to take whatever precautions would have been necessary, but that's not the case. It's a weird year when you say, "Thank you, Jesus, he's just not feeling good." But that's kind of where we're at, and we fully intend he'll be back feeling much better next week, and so those of us who wondered, and we all wonder, and that's just kind of what we do in 2020. That's the story, and we pray that they would get feeling better. So I do want to welcome you. If you're here in person with us, thanks for joining us and making us a part of kind of the end of the Thanksgiving celebration. For those of you who came out in Dodgeville, we really appreciate you being here. If you're watching at Richland Center, we really appreciate you, love you. Thank you for being a part of our church and being a part of that campus. And we do want to welcome those of you who are watching online. Today's a little different, and most of you know that. We're streaming using YouTube, and the goal really is we're testing and trying different things just to make sure we have the absolute best, clearest service. And so we're going to try YouTube. We may go back, we may go forward. We're just trying to do the best thing by those of us who are part of the online community. If you are watching us online on YouTube today, if I don't look as good as I normally do, it's because you're watching the wrong Hidden Valley. That's pretty bad of me. It's Christmas time, and I'm making fun of a pastor, Pastor Zach, and it's Christmas. I don't think Pastor Zach would do that. But anyway, actually, earlier this year, I got these emails from this lady, and she kept calling me Pastor Zach. And I didn't quite understand what was going on because she asked me why we changed the look of our church. But she didn't ask anything about the change of the look of me. And we finally realized, oh, she's talking about that church. But we want to thank you for being a part of our community and joining us, and let us know if there's problems with the way this works today. We're just trying to figure out the best way to do it. So, it's Christmas, or at least it's getting close to Christmas, and we're going to do a series from now through Christmas, and the series is called Be a Joyful Noise. Not in the grating sense and that irritating sense of the word noise, but noise that you kind of like. It's kind of infectious. It's kind of contagious, as that opening video showed. Be that kind of noise. And the reason we're calling it this is because Christmas, maybe more than any other holiday, we associate Christmas with certain noises. There are certain sounds that are just Christmas. There's a song that you don't listen for the other 11 months of the year, but now that it's Christmas, you want to hear that song. And your favorite radio station, if they haven't done so pretty soon, they're going to switch exclusively to Christmas songs because there's a sound we just like it at Christmas time. There's a story we like to hear. You know, the other 11 months of the year, yeah, that story. But now, I want to hear that story. There's the sound of ripping paper. There's just sounds that we like at Christmas time. You know, for my family, the sounds of Christmas have always started on Black Friday. For whatever reason, when my girls were young, we would get up like at 3 or 4 in the morning. You know, I'd like yank them out of bed, and we would go shopping. Really, we didn't go shop. We didn't buy a whole lot of stuff. We went more to listen. You know, we'd show up at the mall. We'd find where the Pepperidge Farm kiosk was, and we'd kind of circle through there to get their freebies. You know, we'd probably go 1 or 2 or 20 times. My girls would actually change their coats so it would look like we were a different family. And then we'd find the place in the mall that had the free hot chocolate, and we'd do the same thing. We'd hear the songs that were playing. We hadn't heard them for a long time, but they sounded really good. And then the particular mall that we kind of grew up with, they had a major retailer attached to the mall, and they had carts, but if you tried to take the cart out into the mall, they had locks on the wheels, so when you crossed a certain threshold, the wheels wouldn't work anymore. Do you know how much fun it is to sit and watch half-awake moms and dads try to like rush and push a cart and it suddenly comes to a halt? They would scream things like, "Joy to the world!" Okay, maybe that's not what they scream. But that's what my girls and I would do. We would just sit and watch, and we would listen. And that's where Christmas started for us. It starts with listening. And for most of us, more than any other time of the year, Christmas, at least in part, it's about listening. It's about the noises. It's about the sounds. It's about the shouts. It's one of those things that Christmas has that maybe other times of the year they just don't have. But guess what? This year, Black Friday, we didn't go Black Friday shopping. There weren't those sounds for us. We slept in. We did it for a variety of reasons. You know, the biggest one is not all my daughters live with us anymore. But there were other reasons. It probably wasn't the wisest thing to go out but so it sounded different. And for almost all of us this year, Christmas is going to sound a bit different. There are going to be sounds that we don't hear this year. There's going to be sounds that we don't make this year. There's going to be noise that we're going to miss this year. So here's the challenge that we're going to do. What if we made some noise this year? And maybe for some of us, it's the first time we're going to make these noises. And I'm not talking about the noise you make after you eat too much ham at Christmas dinner. What if we made some different sounds this Christmas? We're going to miss some noise, so let's make some noise. You know, a lot of you have heard there's a Bible verse, and it's not necessarily a Christmas Bible verse, but you've heard this before. It's this verse. It's make a joyful noise. It's found 5 times in the Bible, and this is one of the times it's found in Psalms. It's a command, make a joyful noise. And normally when you hear this, you're talking about someone who likes to sing loud but really can't sing well. What if this year we made it our goal to make a joyful noise? And by the way, that word noise, if you don't like the idea of noise, that word can be translated in a few different ways. To be sure, it means noise, but sometimes in the Bible it means a sound. Just make a joyful sound. Sometimes the word is translated shout. Make a joyful shout. Clear, crisp, loud. So I'm going to let you, based on your personality and who you are and which one fits you best, which one should you do this year? Some of you, you come from a loud family and you're by nature loud. It's just who you are, and that's okay. So you should make a joyful noise. Some of us are more subdued, a little quieter. It's a little out of character for you to make noise. So this Christmas, would you make a joyful sound? And some of us, you got to get that energy kind of built up, and you kind of get some momentum rolling, and you get there, and you just shout. Make a joyful shout. So that's kind of what we're going to do for the next few weeks, is we're going to look at some of our favorite Bible characters and see the noise that they made. See the sound that they made. Because here's what the story of Christmas really, in essence, is all about. It's about a Savior. He entered the world in a very quiet way. Not a lot of fanfare. I mean, he didn't make a lot of noise when he came. There wasn't a whole lot going on. It was just in the small little corner of the earth. No, 99.99999% of people had no idea what was going on. He was really quiet. But 2,000 years later, his life is still making a noise. It's still making a sound. It's still making a shout. And that's just our goal this year. That if we claim to follow Jesus, that our life would make a noise. It would make a sound. It would make a shout this year. So that's kind of the introduction for where we're going for the next few weeks. But to start it off, I'm going to ask you a question because we're kind of like at the beginning of the gift buying season. And I know some of you have already bought all your gifts, and I don't like you if you've done that. But it's gift buying season. Whether you do it in the store or online, it's just that time of year. And so I ask you the question, anybody have a person in their life, it's just hard to buy for them? I mean, for a variety of reasons. They're either, you just don't know what they like, they're kind of picky about things, they already have all the things they need, they're just difficult and hard to buy for. Anybody have a person like that on your list? My family, they say that I'm like that. I don't understand why, because I ask for the same thing, socks, every year. I'm also married. I'm not going to mention names, but I'm married to a person who's hard to buy for. I never quite get it right. And that person who I'm not going to name her, we often sit together and we look at the computer and we kind of say, do you want that? Okay, let's order that. And then we act surprised on Christmas morning. That's just the best way for us to make this thing work. You know, I'll try to do it without her sitting there, and I'll kind of like be on the computer and I'll ask a random question trying to be coy so she doesn't know what I'm talking about, and I'll mention, boy, I think you would look really good wearing, and she just yells, no. You know anybody who's hard to buy for? You know, that person is probably not only hard to buy for at Christmas, but they're also difficult to buy for their birthday, right? It's not like suddenly it changes when you get to the birthday, suddenly they become easy. That person is always difficult to buy for. And Christmas, well, it's Jesus' birthday, or at least we remember his birthday, and it is Christmas, so maybe he deserves twice as many gifts. So you think the person that you want to buy for is hard for. What do you buy for Jesus? And here's some things we should remember before we buy a gift for Jesus. Psalm 50, verses 10 through 12 says this. Every beast of the forest is mine, the cattle on 1,000 hills. I know all the birds of the hills, and all that moves in the field is mine. If I were hungry, I would not tell you, for the world and its fullness are mine. Okay. So in buying for Jesus, don't buy him cattle, don't buy him birds, don't buy him food. It's already his. And furthermore, not only does he already own it, this is what John 1:2 says about Jesus. All things were made through him. So no matter what you get Jesus, he's going to say those words that you do not like to hear from somebody you give a gift to. He's going to say this, I already have one of those. What do you buy Jesus? I mean, that person that's really difficult for you to buy, they don't compare to Jesus in terms of being difficult to buy for. There's nothing that you could give Jesus that he doesn't say, that's already mine. I already have it. I don't need that. So what would you get Jesus at Christmas? What would you get him for his birthday? Because, they're kind of one and the same for him. I'm not going to spend a lot of time proving what I'm about to say, but this is what I really believe is true about gifts and Jesus. The one gift that Jesus wants is the one thing that will help us be a joyful noise, a joyful sound, a joyful shout to other people. In other words, the one thing, the one unique thing that you and I could give Jesus will actually allow us to be a noise, not a grating, but a good noise, a sound, a shout to other people. What is that one unique gift that you can give? It's your worship. The only unique personal gift that can come from you to Jesus, unlike what anybody else can give, is worship. It's also the only thing that's going to allow you and I to kind of be noisy, to make a sound, to shout in such a way that people's lives will be better. There's actually a mysterious group of people who understood this in the story of Jesus. They're the people we call wise men. They're the people we call magi. And there's lots of things we think we know about them, but there's really only one thing the Bible tells us about them. In Matthew 2, 1 through 2, we are told the reason these guys show up on the scene. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? We saw a star when it rose and have come to worship him." Do you see the reason they showed up? We're just coming to worship. And then in the story, just a few verses later, we find out that the reason they came, they actually accomplish it in chapter 2, verse 11. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and they worshiped him. Then opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. So there's these three kings, right? How do we know there are three kings? Because that's the song they sang. We Three Kings. They showed up on Jesus' doorstep and they sang the song, We Three Kings. Actually, we don't know if they sang. We don't know if there were three. We don't know if they were kings. We just know that they came to worship. We know that they came from the east, but we don't know from where in the east. We know that they brought gold, frankincense, and myrrh, but we don't know why they brought gold, frankincense, and myrrh. The gifts were not the reason they came. They didn't say, we want to find this so we can give him gifts. No, they said, we would just want to worship him. And the word for worship, and this is where you have to kind of paint a picture for yourself. The word for worship, there's different words for worship in the Bible, but this word for worship, it literally means to fall down, lie face first, to honor, to adore. That's what they came to do. They came to worship. So those of us, who have nativity scenes at home with the little glass figurines, go home and you've got the Jesus figurine and the Mary and the Joseph and the barnyard animals, and you've got the kings. Take the kings and lie them on their faces, because that's probably what they did. Because as much as we don't know about them, they just showed up to worship. And for most of us, we say, well, that means they sang, Scott, because, that's what we do on a Sunday morning. We worship for, 20 to 25 minutes, and we call them worship songs, and that's good, and that's great. So that's what they did. They did sing. Maybe they really sang We Three Kings. Worship's a little bigger than just singing. Nothing wrong with singing. It's just a little bit bigger. And we don't have a house where Jesus is at that we can just show up and knock on the door and fall straight down. But we want to learn how to worship. So we're going to do what they did at the count of 3. If you're at home, you can do this in your living room or wherever you're at. If you're here, we've got our chairs socially distanced, so you can fall straight down and do this. At the count of 3, we're going to worship. We're going to fall flat on our faces. Are you ready? 1, 2. Actually, I'm a little sore. I was at the gym yesterday, so if I go down, I'm not sure I'll get back up. Is that what we have to do to worship, to make a noise this Christmas? Do we really have to fall down? Here's the question. How do you and I do what the Magi did? And thanks for asking that question. Because their story, that's what they came to do, was to worship. Amidst all the other things we don't know about them, was there 1 of them, 2 of them, 30 of them? We don't know. Why they brought those gifts, we don't know. But we know that they came to worship. Paul, writing way after the Magi came to visit Jesus, he wrote a chapter of the Bible, and I think he was probably thinking about these guys. I don't know this for sure, but I think he was thinking about these guys when he wrote this chapter. And it starts like this in Romans 12:1. Present your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. In other words, worship, it includes music, but it's kind of bigger than music. It's just about you saying to God, here I am. Here I am. It's something that you do more than just a half hour on a Sunday morning. It's daily saying, here I am, God. It's kind of like them traveling hundreds, maybe thousands, maybe weeks, maybe months, maybe years, and just saying, here I am. It's kind of what they did. In essence, what Romans 12 is, it's a kind of a way for you and I to make some Christmas noise, to make some sounds. And here's what you need to realize, and I've said this before, whenever you look at a list in the Bible, here's what you need to really understand. God doesn't want you to take that list and say, unless I have these all done by tomorrow at 7:30, God hates me. Because it's not true. God has never expected you to look at these lists and say, until I get all of these right, I'm a failure. It's a list, and you look at it and you say, I'm going to work on this one, and I'll skip that one, and I'll work on this one. And then I'll come back to that one later. So Romans 12, and we're not even going to look at the whole list, but Romans 12 is really a list, a Christmas list, if you will, of what it would look like for you and I to worship, to live in such a way that our lives make noise. And so we're going to run through some of these, but don't go home and say, I have to do every single one of these by tomorrow or God's upset with me, because here's what's going to happen. You're not going to make it, because they're hard. So take a look at this list and say, I'm going to do this one this Christmas. I'm going to do these two this Christmas. But don't say you're going to do 4. Don't say you're going to do 5. Just 1 or 2. Make some noises. Don't try to make all the noise. So here's the list of how to worship God by making noise in other people's lives. Romans 12:3 says this, "For by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment." You want to know what the first act of worship is? The first way that you're actually going to make a pleasant sound in other people's lives is? Just kind of think reasonably about yourself. You know, it's interesting that people who think that they have no faults, they tend to make it all about themselves, right? I can do this, I can do that, I'm better than I. But have you noticed that on the opposite end, it's really the same thing? People who kind of put themselves down, they kind of make it all about themselves too. I can't do that. You'll have to. I can't. I'm not. You notice that both extremes, when we think too highly or too little of ourselves, we just are making it all about ourselves. So you know what an act of worship is that's going to allow me to make a sound that's pleasant to other people? It's just to take an honest look at yourself. It's asking this question: what are some of my strengths and some of my weaknesses? If you come up with a list of strengths that's here and your weaknesses are there, you might want to take another look. If your strengths are down here and you have this many weaknesses, you might want to do a recount. The first step into being a joyful noise, a shout, a sound to the people around you is just be honest with who you are. You have some incredible strengths, and you've got some weaknesses. He goes on in Romans 12:6 and says this, "Having gifts that differ according to the grace given to us, let us use them." So you look at yourself and say, I've got these strengths and I've got some of these weaknesses, and now you just use your strengths. You do them. I mean, if you honestly sit and look at yourself and say, I'm strong in this area, I'm strong in this area, I'm strong in this area, and I'm weak, and I'm weak here, and I'm weak here, use this. Use this list. Do those things that God has gifted you to do. You're the best person to do it. You know, God isn't asking us to act out of character. You know, when we found out that Derek was not going to be able to lead us in worship today, nobody on staff came up with this idea. Hey, Scott, why don't you sing? I'm kind of offended nobody thought of that. That's not me. It wouldn't be pleasant for anyone. God isn't asking you to look at your weakness list and I want you to do these things. No, I want you to look at your strength list. So here's the question you and I need to ask ourselves this Christmas. Who in my life needs me to be me? Not somebody different. For their benefit. Just be you for somebody's benefit. It's not that difficult. Be you for someone else. Romans 12:10 says this, love one another with brotherly affection, outdo one another in showing honor. I love that phrase because I'm kind of a competitive guy. Outdo somebody else in showing honor. Anybody here at Christmas, you may not say it, but there's a competition between you and the person you give gifts to. You really want to buy them a better gift than they buy you. I confess, my brother-in-law, Dave, I try to outdo him every year. He's a pastor, too. He's a pastor in Arizona. And we agreed, I don't know how many years ago, we agreed that at Christmas, we would each buy the other one a book that we read during the past year that kind of had impact on how we do ministry and stuff. And every year, I look at some of the books I read and say, no, I want to give him one that has more pages. Because I want to make sure that if he gives me a book that has 200 pages, I give him a book that has 300. I want to give him a book that's, a little more spiritual. A book that's got some depth and deep and makes me look like I'm really smart. Because if he gives me a book that's smarter than what I give, that's not good. I haven't decided this year which book, but it's got to be good. By the way, 2 years ago, guess what we did? We got each other the same book. I don't know what that says about us. But is there anybody in your life you're kind of competitive? You got to give them a better gift than they give you. That's kind of what this verse is about. It says, look at those people in your life who you have, apparently a good relationship with. Outdo them in giving honor. Ask yourself this question. Who in my life right now deserves some honor? Hey, thanks for what you did this past year. Thanks for being there when this happened. Thanks for this when... It's a competition. Who deserves honor? They may give you some, but you give them a little more than they're giving. Just like I'm going to give Dave a way better book than he's going to get me. Outdo in giving honor. That will make a noise. That will make a sound. Somebody's Christmas will be better if we do that. We kind of started this next one last week. Romans 12:14 says, bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse them. Actually, skip that what I said about next week. Bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse them. Hey, anybody this year been a real pain? Anybody this year in your life been difficult? They should have been there for you at that moment when you needed them, and they didn't show up at all. Here's the shout. Here's the noise you should make. Bless them. Look in the past several months, who didn't show up, who disappointed, who came up short. Bless them. That's not easy. That's a hard sound to make. It's a hard noise when you want to make other noises towards them. So here's the question. How can I bless someone who has not been a blessing to me this year? We all have those people. We just do. And here's where last week comes up next week. Romans 12:15, rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. If you weren't with us last week, we had some videos of people who've gone through some stuff this year, and we just celebrated with them. Because people were more than willing to tell us good things that have happened in their life, and they were more than willing to make a video of that. I mean, we had to cut back what people said to get all the videos in. But you know what? We didn't have any videos of people who were hurting because people don't make videos. Nobody wants to have a video in a screen in front of a group of people saying, this year has really been difficult for me, and I failed in this way and that way, and this part of my life is... Nobody makes those kind of videos. But you and I have about a month before Christmas. And here's the question to ask yourself. Who needs me in my life to rejoice with them? And who needs me to weep with them? Is there someone that you need to come alongside and say, hey, I know life's been difficult. I know it's been hard. And I'm here for you. Anybody? It's a way to make a great, joyful sound this Christmas. It's a way to shout into someone's life. Romans 12:18 says this, if possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. If possible. Anybody have a family member who it's hard to live with them? If you're sitting next to them, you can look at them right now. You probably better not do that. Anybody have somebody in your life that this year the relationship's kind of crumbled? And you can come up with lots of reasons of things they did wrong, and there's probably some things that you did wrong. But right now, there's no peaceable living taking place between the two of you. And if you're honest, you probably don't even want to put the effort in. But you want to make a joyful noise, if possible. As much as it depends on you, do all that you can to live peaceably, to make it right. That's a noise. It's going to change Christmas if we did that. So here's the question to ask yourself. Who needs me to take the first step? How many of us are waiting for the other person to take the first step? Is there a relationship that you should take the first step? It's time for you to take the first step. So those magi, we really don't know a lot about those guys. We don't know how many there are. We don't know where they came from. We don't even know what the word magi means. Did you know that? I mean, some Bible translations say wise men. Some people say kings. Some people say sorcerers. Some people say astrologers. Some say they were magicians. We don't even know what they are. We know they came from the east. We don't know how far they came. We don't know how long they came. We know they brought gifts. We don't know why they brought gifts. There's only one thing we know about them. They came to worship. They made a noise. They made a sound. They shouted. To make a joyful noise, a joyful sound, a joyful shout, it kind of requires worship and not just singing. And you should sing with us on a Sunday morning, whether it's virtual or in person. It's not just singing, though. It's about looking at your life and saying, here, God, what? What do I do? And who needs to be a part of this? By the way, 30 years after these magi did their incredible act of worship, there was somebody else. And we don't often think in terms of worship for this. But Jesus dying on the cross, it was an act of worship. Look again at Romans 12:1. Present your body as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable God, which is your spiritual worship. That sounds an awful lot like what Jesus did at the cross. It was an act of worship. He didn't sing. He took his body and he said, here I am, God, what do you want from me? And 2,000 years later, Jesus' act of worship, dying on a cross for you and I, it's the loudest noise, it's the loudest sound. It gets shouted every year, every place. That's what worship does. And if you're new to Christianity, maybe you've decided to come to church or watch church this year for the first time because 2020 has really been a cruddy year for you. Listen to the story of Christmas. Hear the sound of Christmas. The sound of Christmas is this. It's God leaving heaven, becoming a man. He lived a perfect life. And even though he lived a perfect life, people put him to death. and he died in our place, and then 3 days later, he rose from the dead. That's the sound of Christmas. And it changes everything. And if you're new to Christianity, that's the sound you need to hear. And the only proper response to that sound is to say, I believe. And you can do that in a couple of moments when we close in prayer. But for the rest of us, here's the goal this Christmas. Christmas this year is going to sound different. My family's Christmas has already sounded different. Yours is going to sound different. What if you and I made different sounds, different noises, different shouts this year? Let's pray. God, I thank you for Jesus. As much as we look at the Magi and are amazed with their act of worship, what Jesus did is so much bigger. Jesus came to earth, lived and died and rose again, and he did it all to have a relationship with us. God, I pray if there's anybody who's watching or maybe in person who's never accepted Jesus, they simply say this: God, I hear what you did through Jesus. I hear that sound that Jesus died for me, and I believe that he did it for me. And God, I pray for the rest of us. Christmas is not going to sound the same way this year, and that's okay. But I pray that we would be people who make incredible sounds, joyful sounds.